Ella Bennett was the pride of her family, a bright 15-year-old with a future full of promise. Her younger brother, Ryan, just 13, was the quiet shadow always walking a step behind her. But beneath that silence grew a jealousy so dangerous it would shatter their family forever. What began as sibling rivalry ended in a shocking murder that no one in their peaceful town could have imagined. The Bennett family lived in a neighborhood where everyone waved to each other, where lawns were neatly trimmed, and where parents felt safe letting their kids ride bikes until the sun dipped behind the trees. Their house stood tall at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, painted white with blue shutters, giving off the image of a perfect American dream. Inside, their two children, Ella and Ryan, seemed to complete that picture. Ella was 15, confident, and full of life. She was the kind of girl teachers adored and friends admired. Her grades were exceptional, and her shelves overflowed with medals from track, ribbons from science fairs, and certificates from school clubs. Ryan, 2 years younger, was often seen by neighbors following close behind her. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect siblings, always together, sharing the same path to school, laughing on the swings at the park, or spending summer afternoons with their friends. But beneath that polished surface, cracks were beginning to form. Ryan felt invisible in his sister's shadow. Every compliment his parents gave Ella stung like a reminder of his own shortcomings. Teachers compared him to his sister, coaches expected more, and classmates teased him for not being as talented or popular. At home, family dinners often turned into discussions about Ella's successes, while Ryan sat in silence, pushing food around his plate. His parents loved him, but they failed to see the jealousy building inside him, the way he clenched his fists under the table, or the long stares he gave at Ella's decorated walls. From the outside, the Bennett's home looked like a safe place filled with love, but behind closed doors, unspoken emotions were growing. Ryan's quiet resentment was no longer just a phase of sibling rivalry. It was something much darker, slowly taking shape in the mind of a boy who felt forgotten. Ryan's resentment toward Ella grew with every passing day, though he rarely spoke about it aloud. His parents, proud of their daughter's achievements, unknowingly widened the gap between their children. When Ella brought home another trophy or certificate, it was proudly displayed in the living room, while Ryan's small accomplishments often went unnoticed. Each new award felt like another reminder of his failures. At school, teachers used Ella as the standard, often saying things like, "You should try to be more like your sister." Those words cut deep, leaving Ryan with a sense of worthlessness he carried back home every afternoon. Ella, in her own way, tried to reach out to him. She invited him to study with her, encouraged him to join sports, and reminded him that he had talents too. But to Ryan, her kindness felt more like pity. Every smile, every attempt at encouragement, only deepened his bitterness. He saw her not as a sister trying to help, but as a rival who was always one step ahead, always shining brighter. Over time, Ryan became more withdrawn. He stopped spending time with friends and avoided family conversations. Late at night, while Ella was busy preparing for competitions or chatting with friends, Ryan sat alone in his room, his thoughts growing darker. He replayed every moment when she received attention, and he was overlooked. Jealousy turned into anger, and anger slowly transformed into obsession. The Bennett household continued with its daily routines, unaware of the storm brewing inside Ryan. To everyone else, he was just a quiet boy adjusting to the challenges of adolescence. But in reality, his mind was beginning to focus on one terrifying idea, removing Ella from the picture entirely. It was no longer just sibling rivalry, it was the birth of something dangerous. On the evening of October 14th, the Bennett household carried on as usual. The smell of dinner filled the air, and the hum of the television drifted from the living room. Ella had retreated to her bedroom after school, her backpack tossed on the floor, textbooks stacked neatly on her desk. She was preparing for an upcoming debate competition, a fact her parents had proudly mentioned earlier that day. As night fell, the family gathered at the dining table, but Ella never appeared. At first, they assumed she was too focused on studying to notice the time. Her mother called up the stairs, but there was no answer. When her father knocked on her bedroom door, The room was eerily quiet. The lights were off and Ella wasn't there. Her phone sat charging on her nightstand, her shoes by the door, and her jacket still hung in the closet. Everything suggested she hadn't planned to leave. Panic began to settle over the family. The thought of Ella slipping out unnoticed seemed impossible. She wasn't the type to run away, and she never went anywhere without her phone. Within an hour, the family's worry turned into dread. They searched every corner of the house, the yard, and the neighborhood. Neighbors joined in, shining flashlights into backyards and calling her name down the streets. When there was still no trace, the Bennetts contacted the police. Officers arrived quickly, combing through Ella's room for clues. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no open windows. The mystery of her sudden disappearance left investigators puzzled. By the next morning, flyers with Ella's face were taped to lamp posts and store windows. The community rallied, searching parks, trails, and wooded areas. What began as a quiet evening turned into the start of a nightmare that would haunt the town forever. As the search for Ella stretched into days, Ryan's behavior began to draw quiet attention. At school, he appeared heartbroken in front of classmates, speaking about how much he missed his sister. He attended vigils with tears in his eyes, standing beside his parents as candles were lit and prayers whispered. To many, he looked like a grieving younger brother, crushed by loss. But to investigators, something about him seemed slightly off. Detectives noticed that Ryan rarely asked questions about the search itself. While Ella's parents constantly demanded updates, Ryan's curiosity focused elsewhere. He asked officers how police tracked fingerprints and whether deleted internet searches could be recovered. His questions sounded less like those of a worried sibling and more like someone testing the limits of an investigation. At home, his behavior became stranger. He insisted on helping search through Ella's belongings, but instead of looking for meaningful clues, he lingered on small objects, almost as if checking to see if something incriminating had been left behind. He also seemed overly eager when reporters arrived, positioning himself near cameras and offering emotional statements that felt rehearsed. Neighbors who initially pitied him started whispering about how his grief didn't quite seem natural. Detectives decided to keep a closer watch. They observed that Ryan never joined community searches far from home, preferring to stay in the immediate area. He also avoided the woods near the edge of town, a detail that struck investigators as odd. His nervous laughter during questioning and his shifting answers about the night Ella disappeared began raising red flags. The public still saw Ryan as a heartbroken boy, but those leading the case started to suspect that his grief might not be genuine. Instead, it seemed like a carefully constructed mask, one hiding secrets that were slowly beginning to surface. 2 weeks after Ella vanished, the case took a horrifying turn. On a cold Sunday morning, a hiker walking through the wooded trails just 3 miles from the Bennett home stumbled upon something unusual. Beneath a pile of branches and damp leaves, the hiker noticed what looked like a piece of fabric. Curious, he brushed away the debris and froze in terror. It was a body, partially concealed and already showing the early signs of decay. Police were called immediately, and the area was sealed off within minutes. When investigators arrived, their fears were confirmed. It was Ella. She had been struck multiple times, her injuries brutal and deliberate. Her hands were bound with duct tape, and signs of a struggle were etched across her body. The discovery shocked the community, shattering the lingering hope that Ella might still be alive. The girl who had once been the pride of her school and the joy of her family was gone, taken in an act of senseless violence. The woods, once a quiet escape for hikers and families, instantly transformed into a crime scene swarming with officers and forensic teams. Evidence bags filled with leaves, soil samples, and discarded items were carefully collected. Every detail mattered. The placement of the body suggested someone familiar with the area. The concealment was sloppy, almost desperate, as though the killer believed simply covering her with branches would erase the crime. News spread rapidly, and the peaceful town was consumed by grief and fear. Vigils turned from hopeful gatherings into mourning ceremonies. Parents clutched their children tighter, and neighbors who once left doors unlocked began double-checking every lock at night. For the Bennetts, The discovery was devastating. Their daughter was gone, and the haunting question remained: who could do this to Ella? What no one suspected yet was that the answer might be closer to home than anyone imagined. As detectives shifted from a missing person case to a homicide investigation, they retraced Ella's final steps. The timeline grew clearer. She was last seen in her room on the evening of her disappearance, with no sign of forced entry. That meant whoever took her had likely been inside the house, or someone she trusted enough to let in. This revelation made investigators look more closely at those closest to Ella. Evidence from the wooded crime scene began raising troubling questions. Fingerprints were lifted from the duct tape used to bind Ella's hands, and among them were Ryan's. At first, the discovery was brushed aside. After all, he lived in the same house, and it wasn't unusual for siblings to share items. But when the lab confirmed that his prints were the only consistent match on the tape, suspicion deepened. Further digging uncovered more cracks in Ryan's story. Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed a figure resembling him sneaking out of the Bennett home late on the night Ella disappeared. He claimed he had gone for a walk because he couldn't sleep, but investigators found it strange that a 13-year-old would wander the neighborhood alone at midnight. His account of the evening shifted each time he was questioned, and the inconsistencies only made him appear guiltier. Detectives also noticed Ryan's demeanor during interrogations. He avoided eye contact when asked direct questions and gave answers that seemed rehearsed. When pressed about why his fingerprints were at the scene, he grew defensive, insisting it was all a coincidence. But his nervous body language told another story. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a disturbing picture. The case that once pointed to an unknown intruder was now circling back toward someone inside the Bennett household. For the first time, investigators openly considered what had seemed unthinkable, that Ella's killer might be her own younger brother. Detectives decided to look deeper into Ryan's private world, and what they uncovered was chilling. With a warrant, they searched his computer and phone, uncovering internet searches that painted a disturbing picture of his state of mind. He had looked up questions like how to get rid of a sibling, how long DNA lasts outside, and how to hide a body without being caught. The searches were dated just days before Ella disappeared. For investigators, this was no longer a tragic mystery, it was premeditation. Friends of Ryan were also interviewed, and their stories confirmed the growing suspicion. Several classmates admitted Ryan had made strange remarks in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. He had joked about wishing Ella would just vanish and once said life would be better if she wasn't around. At the time, his peers dismissed the comments as dark humor or sibling frustration. In hindsight, they were eerie warnings of what was to come. The forensic evidence continued to tighten around him. Dirt samples from Ryan's shoes matched the soil composition from the exact spot where Ella's body was found. Investigators also discovered scratches on his arms and hands that he had explained as playing with a family cat. But under closer examination, the marks aligned more with defensive wounds left during a struggle. The narrative Ryan had tried to build, that of a grieving younger brother, was unraveling quickly. Each new discovery tore holes in the mask he presented to the world. What seemed like childish jealousy had grown into something far more dangerous, an obsession with eliminating the person he believed was standing in the way of his happiness. By now, detectives were convinced they had their suspect. All that remained was breaking through Ryan's wall of denial and forcing him to confront the terrible truth he had been hiding. Under the weight of mounting evidence, Ryan's carefully built facade began to crumble. Detectives brought him into a final interrogation, laying out the damning proof piece by piece: the fingerprints on the duct tape, the dirt on his shoes, the scratches on his arms, and the chilling online searches. At first, he sat in silence, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. He denied everything, insisting it was all coincidence. But as investigators pressed harder, his composure broke. Tears fell, and his voice shook as he admitted what he had done. Ryan confessed that on the night Ella disappeared, he had lured her into the basement under the pretense of needing help with homework. Fueled by anger and years of pent-up jealousy, he struck her in a fit of rage. When Ella tried to fight back, he panicked and bound her hands with duct tape. Realizing what he had done, He dragged her out of the house under the cover of darkness and into the woods, leaving her body hidden beneath branches. He believed that without Ella, the world would finally notice him. The confession devastated the Bennetts. Their family had been torn apart not by an outside threat, but from within. Ella, the bright and promising daughter, was gone forever, and Ryan, just 13 years old, would spend his adolescence in a secure juvenile facility. The law couldn't treat him as an adult due to his age, but the sentence ensured he would not return home for many years. For the community, the case was a haunting reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it can emerge in the most unexpected places, even within the walls of a loving home. Ella's memory lived on through vigils, scholarships, and stories told by those who loved her, while Ryan's name became synonymous with betrayal and tragedy. The Bennett family's perfect image was shattered, leaving behind a legacy of heartbreak that would never fully heal.